meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, Cordelia, yours is a story of great struggle and great beauty. As a former foster youth and now a foster care advocate, among many other things, your greatest passion is to bring healing to children and families who have experienced trauma. I'm so glad you're here today, Cordelia.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be a representation of those who experience trauma, who experience having to navigate the foster care system from all aspects. So I'm just so grateful that you have invited me to come and chat with you today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love and I appreciate your willingness to share your story. So why don't we just get right started? As a young child, only 5 years old, you entered foster care. And I'm wondering if you don't mind, as you think back about that day, do you remember that day? Do you remember circumstances around it? What could you tell us about that day?
So I don't remember that day in particular. What I know about that experience is that I wasn't the first of my family to enter the foster care system. So I was experiencing the system because of the generational cycles, the generational trauma, and the generations of the lack of system being able to provide healing and success for my family. What I do remember from my upbringing in terms of reasons why children may end up in foster care is because my mom was in and out of incarceration and my dad was a drug addict and alcoholic. And before my mom was sentenced to 10 years in prison, I remember her coming in and out of incarceration and not really knowing or remembering when that was going to happen. And I remember this one particular moment. I was sitting on the stairs. We lived in a townhome at the time. I was sitting on the stairs and the house was pretty quiet. The lights were off. I think I remember maybe like the stove light being on and it just being very quiet, feeling very scary. And I remember my stepdad walking in and telling me that my mom wouldn't be home that evening because she was going to be incarcerated.
Wow. So that quiet for you, was that not your normal? Because you talked about, sometimes people might say, oh, I remember the low lights and the quiet and that was peaceful. I found that interesting that you said it was scary. So was that abnormal?
Yeah, it was definitely scary. I think I come from a pretty big family. And so loudness and chaos and, talking and the TV being on and people interacting were things that felt comforting. I hesitate to use the word normal, but that felt more comforting than that moment that I remember sitting on that stairs and it being quiet.
And so how old were you when you heard your mom was going to be gone for that long?
So my mom was in and out of incarceration. And then when I was 12 years old, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Okay. 12 years old. I mean, really the rest of your childhood. She's gone. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, wow, I won't see my mom again. I won't have that relationship with her until I'm an adult.
Wow. How does a child process that? I mean, how did you process that? That's huge, like huge
Yeah. At the time, I don't know that I did.
Sure.
I think it was one of those situations where I found out this information, and I want to say immediately I went into survivor mode. I went into a mode of trying to figure out what I was going to do, where I was going to go, what was going to happen to my younger sister, and how was I gonna manage life? Like I think I just had so many questions that were unanswered, and I don't know that I had the space to process it in a healthy way.
Sure. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you did remain with family in your foster care journey, right? But you moved from family to family. Is that accurate?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I did go with family, so I did experience kinship at one point in time, but I did ultimately end up in a foster home and then in a group home.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
So lots of transitions, lots of placements, lots of schools. There was a lot going on then.
What should our listeners know? What do they need to know about what it's like for a child to, you're normal, really. From 5 to adulthood, right? Was transition, was moving from home to home.
Yeah.
What does that
do? And
do?
I love how you say adulthood, right? Because I transitioned I moved pretty much every year of my life, if not multiple times, until I was 26.
What does that do to a person? How has that impacted? How did it impact you as a child? But even now,
I was talking to a mentor the other day, and I think what your listeners should know about that when a child experiences a transition or that removal from biological family, whether or not it was a healthy situation or not, each transition is traumatic. The moment I was removed from my biological family at 5 years old and placed into the foster care system, I was experiencing a traumatic situation. Going from foster home to foster home, going back home with family, going back into the foster care system. Each time that transition happens, there's impact.
Right. What would you describe if you had to describe trauma, not the technical way, but in a way, for the average everyday person? How do you describe trauma?
Oh, it's interesting because as a licensed clinical therapist, I have to explain this and break it down to people sometimes, because I think a lot of times if it's not an obvious tragedy or something that seems obviously traumatic, it may not seem or feel like trauma. I think for me during that time, what it felt like was that no one wanted me, that I wasn't important, that I wasn't of value, that I wasn't going to be anything or become anyone. And I actually, speaking of CAFO, when I was at the conference last year, I participated in a workshop, and they defined trauma as something that happens in someone's life that impacts their ability to cope in everyday life.
That's really good.
And I thought that was a really good definition of trauma, because it doesn't matter what we look like. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. We as human beings can experience trauma.
Right. And it impacts everybody differently, right?
Yeah. It normalizes the aspect that, children and families who are experiencing foster care are not the only ones that can experience trauma.
Absolutely.
The families that come in and that want to help families can experience trauma.
Yeah. So, Cordelia, you talked about some of these feelings, which are it's heartbreaking, because those are like the core needs of every person: to belong, right? To be loved, to matter. And you were questioning all of that because your whole life was kind of saying that, right? The transitions, the changes, going back and forth. It was like kind of screaming that at you. Did you have any people who were pushing back against that messaging for you?
Yeah, I did. And it's interesting because I think at the time I didn't always believe them or trust them, but I'm so glad that they stayed the course and that they believed in me before I believed in myself. I think my biggest supporters were those that I didn't live with. I know we have this aspect of we want to take a child in and kind of save them from their experiences. But I want to highlight how much power there is in a supporter, supporting a young adult, a child who is experiencing the foster care system in a way that doesn't necessarily mean you have to provide a roof over their head.
Yes.
And so people like that for me were my cheerleading coach, my 7th grade teacher, staff who were a part of the youth advisory councils, pageant coaches. So really just women, now that I think about it, a lot of women really just stepped in and took me under their wing and encouraged me and showered me with positivity and empowerment. And those, I owe everything to those women because without them, I would not have gotten to where I am today.
Wow. I absolutely love what you said about the supporting role, because I think it's so natural for humans to think, I've got to do like the big thing, the really hard thing, like the all-in thing. And that's not always what God's asking us. And that's not always what that person needs.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because honestly, if you were in some one of those homes, they would have to also be kind of parent. And when they got to walk alongside you, they got to be cheerleader, right? There didn't have to be the discipline and things like that.
That's so spot on, because a lot of times those who are experiencing the foster care system are not looking for replacements of their parents, right? They have identified their parents as who they are. They may not have even processed where they are as a result of their parents not being able to parent them in a way that was protective, that kept them safe, that was healthy, right? And so it can be off-putting sometimes if someone comes in and tries to play that role. For me, it was my older sister. We had, my younger sister and I were split up, and we both went with older sisters.
Okay.
And I remember that transition being really hard for me because my sister immediately went into this disciplinary role that I couldn't conceptualize with at the time.
Yeah.
So the dynamic from the outside looking in, or how she would explain it to other people, is that Cordelia is disrespectful. Cordelia doesn't listen. Cordelia doesn't follow the rules. Cordelia, right? So all of these negative things, when really it wasn't me or her, it was the shift in role. It was the shift in dynamic of the situation.
That makes a ton of sense. Like you're my sister, not my mother.
Yeah. And I would say that too, right? I just think how that, how that sounds from someone that's working really hard to make sure that you have a roof over your head, clothes on your back, food on the table, going to these meetings, right? Like that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is like, she wasn't my mother.
Right.
And especially at that time, I was probably 12 or 13. I knew who my mother was. And I wasn't looking for anyone to replace her. That didn't mean that I didn't still need the things that a mother should provide.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? Because I still needed those things. But that word, that role was something that I wasn't necessarily looking for anyone to feel, especially not my big sister, who I used to be able to go to and share some of the things with her with that I couldn't share with my mother.
Sure. Wow. So talk about the impact on a child to have a mom incarcerated. Were you able to visit her? What did that look like for you?
I didn't see my mom for the first 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I didn't talk to her. I think she would write letters and I would get them every now and then. But ultimately, I did not see my mom I eventually did get driven down to go see her. She was about 3 to 4 hours away from where I lived. And my foster mother always expressed her discomfort for being in those positions and having to take me. And about 3 years in, I was able to go and visit my mom for the first time. I was probably about 15 years old. And I remember it was like a feeling that you get when you do have that like connection. Although my mom made some poor choices, I believe that she did love me. Although, her life circumstances didn't allow for her to protect or keep me and my siblings safe. I knew that it was because of her own trauma that shaped her into the parent that, she was. And I just remember us hugging each other for quite some time in that visiting room. My foster mother didn't take me down there often. I eventually went off to college, and college was probably about 2 hours away, so a little bit closer to the prison, and I had a car. And so I would, me and one of my older brothers would go and visit her on weekends. And so we would kind of just tag team and get together to go visit her throughout that time period.
Wow. Excuse me. How I feel like you being able to see your mom with that kind of perspective is really mature. Is that something that you felt like, did that come naturally? How did you learn that? Because I think that is such a key to healing and forgiveness for all of us. It's easy when you've been hurt by someone to think of them as just the monster, right? This bad guy. But when you can dig a little deeper, we're all humans, and we all do make mistakes, and some have bigger consequences than others, right? But our past do impact us.
I grew up in church. I think growing up in church, I did learn about forgiveness. I learned about kindness. I learned about, being someone that was genuine, that was a giver. So I think a part of that was naturally instilled in me. But to apply it to my life, I think is a whole nother type of like perspective. And so there was a time where I was very angry and very bitter and upset. I remember this one particular visit with my mom, and my mom was adopted.
Okay.
She had my sister, one of my older sisters. She had her at 14 years old. Both ended up in the foster care system. Then my adoptive grandmother adopted my sister.
Okay.
And my mom stayed into the foster care system.
Wow.
So we were having a conversation about nature versus nurture because my sister ended up back with my mom at some point in time. So like family dysfunction at its finest. And I just remember, us kind of getting into it. And at this point, I would say in my mom's journey, she hadn't fully acknowledged and taken accountability for the decisions that she made and how they impacted our lives. And I just remember kind of blowing up on her and being upset and walking to another area in the prison where I just kind of sat there and I cried because at the time I would see peers around me, like young girls, having these relationships with their mom where they could pick up the phone and call them if they got into a disagreement with their best friend, or if they had a crush on a boy, they could share that information with their mom. But I didn't have that luxury or that opportunity. I had to write a letter to my mom. I had to wait for her to respond. Wow. I had to wait for her call, or I had to plan an entire Saturday out of my life as a college student to go visit her and try to catch her up on as much as I could possibly remember between that time and the time I had seen her before. And so I think it was just my love for wanting to help others in my situation, which gave me the insight and the ability to understand that anger, that bitterness, that pain wasn't going to allow me to move forward. And with that, I had to forgive and accept my mom for who she was.
Once you came to that point of forgiveness, did you feel different?
Oh, yeah. I felt a lot different.
Talk about that.
It was, I forgave my mom and my dad, I would say, early on in my healing journey. That was the catalyst, really, to who I am today, because without that, I don't think I would have been able to navigate a lot of situations like I've been able to do. And that forgiveness piece really just made me understand that people make mistakes. And people's experiences, their upbringing, you know, who they are, who my parents were, was not a definition of me. It didn't define who I was.
Yeah.
It was more so a representation of them, or the lack of parenting that they may have had, or their lack of ability to make decisions that were best for them as parents that would impact their children. And, you know, as I got further along in my career, what I also realized was that there were generations of trauma that impacted my parents. And that's the reason, you know, part of the reason why they ended up parenting the way that they did, or not getting themselves together to be the best parents they could be, because they didn't have the healing. They didn't have the support. They didn't have the tools.
Yeah. I want to back up a little bit in your story, because as a teenager, you kind of started to take matters into your own hands and advocate for yourself.
Yes.
What did that look like, and kind of how did that come about?
I remember people telling me, you know, like, Cordelia, you have a know-it-all attitude. And I'm like, I was confused at the time, because I'm like, well, I'm in survivor mode. I got to figure out what I'm doing with my life, because it feels like the adults around me don't know what to do. And I get it. As an adult now, as a mom, as a wife, life is hard, and making decisions for other people can be so challenging. But I knew what I wanted for my life. And that was important. And it was important for other people around me and those who supported me to understand that I knew what I wanted for my life. And that was the only thing that was going to work, was that that we create a plan around what I wanted. Because anything that anybody else wanted for me was not going to motivate me enough. I wasn't going to have the discipline. I wasn't going to have the inspiration to keep going if I was to go down a path that someone else wanted for me.
Totally. Yeah. You can never want it more than the person you're trying to support.
Yes.
Or and like you said, sorry, Cordelia, like you said, was you can't want what they don't want also. So you can't, I think there's two folds to that, right? The one is you can't want different things than they want. But even if you want the same things that they've said they've wanted and they do want, you still can't want it more than them.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do want something, well, one thing, my life was very different than my younger sisters in terms of how we navigated our ways to where we are today. Excuse me. And what I think is so critical about my journey and my supporters that we talked about was that there were times that they wanted it more than me, but they also saw that I wanted something, that I wanted help, that I felt like I needed help at times. I might not was always receptive to the help, but that there was something, like there was light at the end of the tunnel. And although there might have been like rocks here and pebbles there and water there, like along the way, they were there helping and guiding me no matter if I fell, no matter if I doubted it, no matter if I wasn't receptive to that help. And so I think, you know, me just being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel was very helpful for my journey and for the people that supported me along the way.
That's awesome. I wonder, would you push back a little bit on my statement then of, is there a time when we need people to want it more than us?
I would say it's not really to want it more than us, but to not lose hope in encouraging us to get what we want out of life.
That's good.
Right? It's like there's like these little nuances that are different, right? It's like you don't want to be too invested in something that someone else doesn't want because we know that our pathways change.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest, affirmations that I live by is that your journey is just as important as the destination. And so our journeys can look so different on any, given day, depending of the situation and circumstances. So you don't necessarily want it more than that person that's really in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah.
Our young adults, our children experiencing the foster care system, they really should be in the driver's seat. And I think my supporters allowed me to take the driver's seat and they guided me, right?
Yeah.
And we all know that you could make 3 right turns and get to the same destination if you make a left.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. So
I'm kind of thinking about it from that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds to me like you have to have those people that keep like putting that vision, the vision you've said you've wanted in front of you, reminding you, encouraging you, maybe holding on to that hope for you when sometimes you don't feel the hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I think was instilled in me was like to remain hopeful.
Yeah.
Because I know that it was rough. It was rough along the way, but I had to remain hopeful. I had to continue to get back up even when I didn't want to, because I knew that was the only way that was going to get me to surviving every day to thriving.
Yeah. This might be too big, broad of a question, so answer it however you want. But you say it was rough. I fully believe that, no doubt in my mind. When you think back on your experience, is there some way of, is there like one or like is there a way to describe like what was the hardest part of it?
The hardest part.
And I don't know if it's necessarily an experience, but was it the emotion side of it? Was it, yeah.
Yeah. That's a big question because I think it was all hard. It was all challenging. And sometimes I think because of where I am today, I don't always put myself back in those positions to really think about how hard it was.
Yeah.
I kind of shocked myself here, getting a little emotional talking about being on that step.
Yeah.
But if I had to identify what the hardest part was for me, if I had to put something to that, I would probably say it was after I aged out of foster care. That was hard. It was like I got thrown to the wolves.
Yeah.
A part of my journey and the story that I tell, although a foster systems advocate, in some ways, me being removed from my family saved me. I found my passion and my purpose through my own lived experiences. And I now have lived expertise and a professional background to help children and families navigate this system. But before I got here, I became an adult way sooner than when we're ready to become adults.
Right.
And so in Virginia, you age out at 18 years old.
Yeah.
There are some services, if you're working and going to school, that you can access until you're 21, sometimes even 23, from a financial aspect, really. But at 18, I was just in my first year of college.
Yeah.
It was hard. So from 18 to 26, I moved every single year. Moving is the second most stressful thing in the world that we experience as humans.
Yeah. Talk about not feeling settled ever.
So it was hard. And I will say what also was hard and challenging about just that notion was that becoming, finding stability made it also challenging because I wasn't used to it.
Yeah.
I got married. I had a baby. We bought a home. Oh man.
Yeah.
The type of trauma that resurfaced. And I was like,
I'm sure.
okay, wait a minute. We have to reel it back in. So those were some difficult, challenging moments. Was, I would say, aging out of the system, being on my own, and then trying to create a life, a normal, right? Like normal life.
Right.
And all the things that came about because that was something I wasn't used to.
Yeah. I think that is so important for all of us to hear, because so naively you can think, oh, she got married, she had a kid, she has a house, great, And that's, like you said, that just like exemplified all that you had gone through, the difference that you don't know how to do this. Nobody knows how to do that, right? Nobody knows how, but when you've been through what you've gone through, there's like exclamation points on it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad I got to that answer. It took me a little while.
I'm glad you did too. I think it's so important because again, we sometimes can forget about the youth aging out, right? Most people, when they think of foster care, think of the little kids, and we must. It's incredibly important. And we need to think about the youth aging out.
Yeah. Yeah. That older youth population.
Yeah.
That, I think a lot of times systems focus on 14 plus, but I mean, we talked about me being someone that knew it all at 12, right?
Right.
I was parentified in ways. I had to figure things out sooner than my peers. At 12 years old, there were a lot of things that I saw, a lot of things that I experienced, and a lot of things that I knew about myself. And, my own family came in trying to shake it all up and create, I think, safety and security, but not necessarily in a way that was helpful for me.
Yeah. So ultimately, you have chosen a career where you're giving back to people. Why did you choose social work?
So I wanted to go to school for psychology. My goal was to become a psychiatrist. Because I think at that point I was just thinking, like, what's a career where I can actually financially provide for myself? But then I was really involved in my youth advisory council. I would go to statewide conferences and national conferences around child welfare and children and families. And I essentially, the law changed is really what prompted me to change my actual focus. So the law changed in probably 2011 or 2012. The law changed, stating that you have to come from an accredited university of social work to be a social worker. So I did that, and I switched schools and became a social worker. I went and got my master's, and I was just really inspired to help change the lives of those experiencing, similar challenges that I experienced. And I'm so grateful that, my path led me to where I am today.
You are, I'm wondering, in your family, are you the first to have graduated?
I'm not. My twin brothers, who are 4 years older than me, they graduated college.
That's
and
awesome.
Without them, I probably wouldn't have went to college. Although education was something that I always heard to be important and a priority and something that I should do, it never really clicked, because a lot of my life, in terms of my academics and navigating school, I was in survivor mode. I had so much going on that school and education wasn't really my focus until later on in high school. I went to 8 different middle schools.
Oh my goodness.
Middle school is from 6th to 8th grade, and I went to 8 different middle schools. So there was just like me going to college didn't even seem realistic. And I think my brothers in their journey, it really put things into perspective that if they could do it, I could do it.
That's awesome. When some of our kids came to us through foster care and then ended up needing adoption. But we used to always tell them, especially when they were little, you guys are going to be cycle breakers. Yay, and they, of course, didn't know what that meant, but they would, pray, help me to be a cycle breaker. Yes. But that's what you are. You're a cycle breaker.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I ended up finding my biological grandmother, and we're connected now. She lives in Texas, and I last seen her in January of this year. And her building this relationship with me has been very challenging. But being connected to her just shows how deep rooted those cycles can be. And so, like, you just saying that means so much to me. Because it's true. Yeah. It's true. And I not only want that for myself, but I want that for other families.
Yeah. Yeah. And for your child. Think about is it a daughter?
I have a little boy. His name is Sebastian.
I mean, he's not going to experience the things you've experienced.
I know.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to see him grow. He adores me, but he doesn't know how much I adore him.
Yes.
I pick him up from daycare and I just tell him how much I think about him all day. But you're so right. And I think that was hard for me to like conceptualize as I became a mom, that, this real reality that I have the ability to give my child a life that I didn't have.
Right. Yeah. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Man, I think just as we get ready to close out here, Cordelia, first, I just want to thank you, because I know, and I just want to acknowledge that you being willing to share your story, I know that is not easy, that does bring up emotion, that it is a toll. And your willingness to take that toll on yourself for the benefit of others is appreciated. And I just want you to know I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Do you have any words of encouragement as we close out we might have kids right now who are in the foster care system listening, going, okay, there's hope, right? Speak directly to them.
Yeah. If I was speaking to a young person that's experiencing foster care, I would tell them that it's not their fault. It's not your fault. Being a parent is hard. Being a parent and living through generational trauma and cycles is challenging. And whatever you're facing right now, whatever you're experiencing today, doesn't define your future success. It doesn't define who you can become or where you're going. It actually is going to shape you into the amazing person that you want to transform into becoming. But always remember that your journey is just as important as your destination. That's what I would tell a young person.
That's awesome. And for anyone listening, I think you need to watch that to see her face as she talks to you directly. Thank you so much, Cordelia, for being on today. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story and using this platform to promote positivity and hope and resilience and perseverance in this space that can be very challenging and very hard on everybody involved. So thank you for doing that, because we need more of that.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.